January 24, 1945, Alsace, France. The world is frozen, the ground is hard as iron, and the air is thick with the threat of death. The German army, desperate to hold the last pocket of resistance west of the Rhine, launches a furious counterattack near the town of Colmar. 600 infantry, 6 Tiger tanks, and tank destroyers surge forward, aiming to break the thin American line and annihilate an isolated battalion of the 3rd Infantry Division. But as the German soldiers advance, something strange happens. Artillery shells begin to fall with uncanny precision. Every time a squad moves, an explosion follows. 50 men fall in minutes not to bullets, but to shells that seem to know exactly where they are. The German commanders know what this means. Somewhere, a forward observer is watching, calling in every shot. But where? They search the field, scouring the snow and fog for any sign of the spotter. They pass within meters of a shallow ditch, so close they nearly step on the man lying there. But they never see him. He's not breathing like a soldier. He's breathing like a turkey hunter. That man is Garlin Murl Conner, a 5'5", 120-pound farmer from Kentucky. He's not a giant, not a hero in the Hollywood sense. But in the next few hours, he will become the deadliest observer of World War II, using skills learned in the forests of Kentucky to save an entire battalion from destruction. To understand how Conner did it, you have to understand where he came from. Born in 1919 in rural Erin, Kentucky, Garlin grew up in the Great Depression. His family was poor, so poor that hunting wasn't a sport, it was survival. He learned to shoot before he learned to read, tracking deer, rabbits, and wild turkeys through the woods. His father taught him the art of still hunting. Pick your spot, blend into the landscape, and don't move for hours. Control your breathing, become invisible. If you've never hunted wild turkey, you might not realize how hard it is. Turkeys have the sharpest eyesight of any bird in North America. They spot the blink of an eye, the twitch of a finger, from hundreds of yards away. If you move, they're gone. If you breathe wrong, they're gone. Garlin learned to wait, to slow his heartbeat, to become part of the forest itself. He also learned to navigate. In the dense Kentucky woods, it's easy to get lost. So hunters mark their trail, small cuts on trees, broken branches, signs only they recognize. It's a way to find your way home, even in the thickest brush. When war came, Garlin Conner volunteered for the army. He was sent to Europe, where he spent 28 months in continuous combat: Morocco, Tunisia, Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, southern France, Alsace. 10 major campaigns for amphibious landings, wounded 7 times. But through it all, he used the same skills he'd learned as a boy, moving silently, disappearing into the landscape, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. On January 24, 1945, Conner was supposed to be recovering from a hip wound in a field hospital. But when he heard the sound of German artillery, he knew his battalion was under attack. He escaped from the hospital, stole a jeep, and drove back to the front. When he arrived, Major General Lloyd B. Ramsey was asking for a volunteer for a suicide mission. Someone needed to run into no man's land under artillery fire and call in targets for American guns. Conner didn't hesitate. He grabbed a spool of telephone wire, a field phone, and a Thompson submachine gun. Private First Class Robert Duddle volunteered to go with him. Together, they ran for 100 yards across open ground, unspooling wire as they went. Conner wasn't just laying a line for communication, he was marking his trail, just as he had in the Kentucky woods. The wire was his lifeline, his way back home. They reached a shallow irrigation ditch, barely a foot deep. Duddle stayed in a nearby ditch. Conner connected the phone and called in, "Command, this is Conner. I'm in position, awaiting targets," and then he waited. The Germans advanced, 600 men in attack waves, Tiger tanks roaring ahead. Conner remained completely still, watching, calling in coordinates, and directing artillery fire with deadly precision. The Germans knew there was an observer somewhere. They searched the field, fired machine guns at anything suspicious, and sent patrols to sweep the area. Some came within meters of Conner's ditch, so close he could hear them breathing, hear their boots crunching in the snow. But they never saw him. He wasn't breathing like a soldier. He was breathing like a turkey hunter. As the German attack pressed closer, Garlin Conner lay motionless in his shallow ditch, the field telephone pressed to his ear. The snow was packed around him, his breath slow and measured, his body as still as the frozen ground. He was no longer just a soldier, he was a hunter, using every lesson he'd learned in the Kentucky woods to become invisible, even as the enemy closed in. The Germans were everywhere. They swept the field with binoculars, fired bursts of machine gun fire at anything that looked suspicious, and sent patrols to probe the American lines. Some came within 20 meters of Conner's position. Others passed so close he could have reached out and touched their boots. But they never saw him. He was breathing like a turkey hunter, slow, shallow, controlled. No movement, no sound, no sign of life. For hours, Conner called in artillery fire with uncanny precision. He watched the German formations, noted their movements, and relayed coordinates back to the American guns. Each time he spoke, another barrage landed, tearing through the enemy ranks. The Germans knew there was an observer somewhere, but they couldn't find him. The snow, the fog, and Conner's stillness made him invisible. But as the battle wore on, the situation grew more desperate. The Germans were now so close that American artillery couldn't fire without risking Conner's life. The enemy was within 5 meters, close enough to hear their voices, to smell their sweat, to feel the vibration of their boots in the ground. The American command, realizing the danger, ordered Conner to fall back. "You're too close," they said. "We can't fire without hitting you." Conner knew what was at stake. If the Germans broke through, his battalion would be surrounded and destroyed. Hundreds of men would die. He made a decision that would define his legacy. Over the phone, he gave the order, "Blanket my position. Fire on my coordinates, now." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line. The artillery officer hesitated, then relayed the order. "All batteries, concentrate fire on Conner's position. Execute." The world exploded. Shells and mortar rained down on the field, the shockwaves so intense they shook the earth. Metal fragments tore through the air. The noise was deafening. Conner lay perfectly still, trusting in his training, his instincts, and a little bit of luck. The Germans, caught in the barrage, were thrown into chaos. Men were killed, wounded, or scattered. The attack collapsed. When the shelling stopped, the silence was overwhelming. The American line waited, unsure if Conner had survived. Then, through the static of the field telephone, his voice came through. "Command, this is Conner. Alive. Enemy retreating. Casualty count at least 50 dead, over 100 wounded." Attack collapsed, line held. Conner had survived. He had called artillery fire on his own position, endured a barrage that would have killed most men, and walked away unscathed. Later that day, American patrols found the ditch where he had lain. The ground was cratered, the snow churned and blackened, but Conner's field phone and Thompson's submachine gun were still there. The men who saw the scene couldn't believe anyone had survived, but for Conner, it was just another hunt. He had spent his life learning to disappear, to become part of the landscape, to wait for the perfect moment. The skills that had kept him alive in the Kentucky woods had saved an entire battalion on a frozen field in France. Garlin Conner's survival after calling artillery on his own position was nothing short of miraculous. But for Conner, there was no time to celebrate. The war was still raging, and his battalion needed every able-bodied man. 10 days after the battle in the snow, with wounds barely healed and nerves still raw, Conner was back on the front lines. The winter of 1945 was unforgiving, but so was the enemy, and so was Conner's sense of duty. On February 3, 1945, Conner led an urban assault in a small French town. The fighting was close, brutal, and chaotic. German soldiers, desperate to hold their ground, fought from basements, attics, and behind barricades. Conner, moving with the same patience and precision he'd learned as a hunter, led his men through the maze of ruined buildings. He personally killed 12 German soldiers and captured 75 prisoners in a single day. For his actions, he earned his 4th Silver Star, but medals were never the point for Conner. He fought because his men needed him, because the mission demanded it, and because he couldn't imagine doing anything else. He was wounded again, his 7th wound in 28 months of continuous combat. Each time, he was sent to a field hospital, patched up, and sent back to the front. Each time, he returned without complaint. Conner's record was extraordinary. 10 major campaigns for amphibious landings, wounded 7 times, and never once did he ask to be sent home. He was the second most decorated soldier of World War II, behind only Audie Murphy. His awards included the Medal of Honor, the Distinguished Service Cross, for Silver Stars, for Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. The French awarded him the Croix de Guerre. But for Conner, the real reward was knowing that he had done his job, that he had protected his men, and that he had survived. But survival came at a cost. When the war ended, Conner returned to Kentucky. There was a parade in his honor, children waving flags, neighbors cheering. He married Pauline Wells, bought a 36-acre farm, and became president of the County Farm Bureau. He lived a quiet life, planting tobacco, raising a family, and serving his community. But at night, the war returned. Conner suffered from nightmares, waking up screaming, fleeing to the porch to smoke alone in the dark. He kept his medals at the bottom of a duffel bag, never displayed them, never talked about them. There was no name for it in 1945, but today we know it as PTSD. Conner lived with it in silence, carrying the weight of his memories alone. His wife, Pauline, was the only one who truly understood. She saw the scars, both physical and emotional. She knew the cost of heroism, the price paid by those who survive when others do not. She watched as Conner struggled to find peace, to reconcile the man he was with the things he had done. But Conner never stopped serving. He became a leader in his community, helping other veterans, supporting local farmers, and teaching his children the values he had learned in war: courage, patience, and the importance of doing what needs to be done no matter the cost. For Garlin Conner, the war ended with a return to the Kentucky hills, a small farm, and a life of quiet service. But for his wife, Pauline, the battle for her husband's legacy was just beginning. While Conner never spoke of his medals or his actions, Pauline knew the truth. She had seen the scars, heard the nightmares, and read the letters from men who owed their lives to her husband's courage. She was determined that the world would not forget what Garlin had done. After Conner's death in 1998, Pauline began a campaign that would last more than 2 decades. She gathered testimonies from surviving veterans, tracked down military records, and wrote hundreds of letters to politicians, historians, and military officials. She spoke to anyone who would listen, telling the story of the Kentucky farmer who had saved a battalion by calling artillery on his own position. The fight was not easy, the Army's bureaucracy was slow, and the standards for the Medal of Honor were high. Some officials argued that too much time had passed, that the records were incomplete, or that Conner's actions, while heroic, did not meet the strict criteria for the nation's highest military award. But Pauline refused to give up. She knew that her husband's story was more than just a tale of individual bravery. It was a lesson in the power of quiet heroism, of doing what needs to be done, without expectation of reward. Pauline's determination inspired others. Veterans who had served with Conner wrote letters of support, describing how his actions had saved their lives. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Wigetman, Conner's battalion commander, wrote, "There is no doubt that Lieutenant Conner should have been awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions. One of the most disappointing regrets of my career is not having the Medal of Honor awarded to the most outstanding soldier I've ever had the privilege of commanding." The campaign gained momentum. Historians, journalists, and military advocates joined the cause. The story of Garlin Conner began to appear in newspapers, on television, and in books about the war. The evidence was overwhelming. Conner's actions on January 24, 1945, had saved hundreds of lives and changed the course of the battle. He had risked everything, not for glory, but for his brothers in arms. Finally, after 22 years of effort, Pauline's fight was rewarded. On June 26, 2018, President Donald Trump posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor to Garlin Murl Conner. Pauline, then 96 years old, accepted the medal on her husband's behalf. She wept as she held it in her hands, surrounded by family, friends, and the men whose lives had been saved by her husband's courage. But the recognition was about more than a medal. It was about honoring the values that Conner embodied: humility, sacrifice, and the willingness to do what is right, even when no one is watching. It was about remembering the men who fight in silence, who carry their burdens alone, and who never ask for praise. Conner's story became a symbol for all the quiet heroes of World War II, the men and women who did their duty, endured hardship, and returned home to build lives of service and dignity. His legacy lives on in the soldiers who still train in the forests and fields, learning the skills of patience, observation, and controlled breathing that once made a Kentucky turkey hunter the deadliest observer in Europe. Garlin Conner's story is not just about a single act of bravery in a frozen ditch in France. It's about a lifetime of service, sacrifice, and humility, a reminder that the greatest heroes are often the ones who never seek the spotlight. As the years passed and the world moved on from World War II, Conner's legacy became a lesson in what it truly means to be a hero. After the war, Conner returned to Kentucky and built a life that was, on the surface, ordinary. He bought a small farm, planted tobacco, and became a leader in his community. He served as president of the County Farm Bureau for 16 years, helped other veterans adjust to civilian life, and raised a family. He never talked about the war unless someone else brought it up, and even then, he was modest, deflecting praise and changing the subject. But those who knew him understood the depth of his experience. They saw the scars, both physical and emotional. They heard the nightmares, the screams in the night, the long hours spent alone on the porch, smoking, and staring into the darkness. Conner suffered from what we now call PTSD, but in 1945, there was no name for it. He simply endured, carrying the weight of his memories in silence. His medals: 1 Medal of Honor, 1 Distinguished Service Cross, 4 Silver Stars, 4 Bronze Stars, a Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, and the French Croix de Guerre were kept at the bottom of a duffel bag. He never displayed them, never boasted, never used them to gain favor or attention. For Conner, heroism was not about glory or recognition. It was about doing what needed to be done, no matter the cost. This humility was perhaps Conner's greatest strength. He understood that war is not about individual achievement, but about the bonds between men, the trust that develops in the crucible of combat, and the willingness to risk everything for the sake of others. His actions on January 24, 1945, were not the result of a desire for fame, but of a deep sense of responsibility to his fellow soldiers. Conner's story also teaches us about the power of preparation and adaptability. The skills he learned as a boy hunting turkeys in the Kentucky woods: patience, observation, controlled breathing, and the ability to disappear into the landscape became the foundation for his success as a forward observer. He used these skills not just to survive, but to save lives, to hold the line, and to turn the tide of battle. His life is a testament to the idea that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. Conner was not a giant, not a natural-born warrior, but a small, quiet man who rose to the occasion when his country needed him most. He reminds us that heroism is not about size or strength, but about character, courage, and the willingness to act. The recognition that finally came to Conner, thanks to Pauline's tireless efforts, is a reminder that the stories of quiet heroes must be told. Too often, history remembers only the loudest voices, the most dramatic moments, and the most visible leaders. But the real work of war and of life is done by those who show up, do their duty, and never ask for thanks. Conner's legacy lives on in the soldiers who still train in the forests and fields, learning the skills of patience, observation, and controlled breathing that once made a Kentucky turkey hunter the deadliest observer in Europe. His story is taught in military academies, shared in leadership courses, and honored at reunions and memorials. But perhaps the most important lesson of Conner's life is the value of resilience. He endured wounds, loss, and the horrors of war, but he never gave up. He returned to the front again and again, not because he was fearless, but because he understood that courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to do what is right in spite of it. Garlin Conner's story is more than a tale of battlefield heroism. It's a lesson in humility, resilience, and the quiet power of doing what's right even when no one is watching. As the decades have passed, his legacy has become a beacon for soldiers, leaders, and ordinary people who wonder what it means to be brave, to serve, and to make a difference. After the war, Conner's life was a study in contrasts. He was one of the most decorated soldiers in American history, but he lived as a humble farmer, rarely speaking of his service. He was celebrated by generals and presidents, but he found his greatest satisfaction in the simple routines of rural Kentucky, planting tobacco, fixing fences, and teaching his children the value of hard work. He was haunted by memories of war, but he never let them define him. Instead, he poured his energy into his family, his community, and the quiet acts of kindness that make a life meaningful. Conner's story is a reminder that heroism is not about medals or parades. It's about the choices we make when no one is looking. It's about the willingness to risk everything for the sake of others, to endure hardship without complaint, and to keep going when every instinct says to quit. It's about the power of preparation, the importance of adaptability, and the value of skills learned in the most unlikely places like the forests of Kentucky, hunting turkeys with a father who taught him to be still, to be patient, and to be fearless. The recognition that finally came to Conner thanks to Pauline's unwavering determination was not just a personal victory. It was a victory for every quiet hero whose story might otherwise be forgotten. It was a reminder that the work of remembering is never finished, that the debts we owe to those who serve are paid not just in medals, but in memory, gratitude, and the lessons we pass on. Today, Conner's story is taught in military academies, shared in leadership seminars, and honored at reunions and memorials. His example inspires new generations of soldiers to value discipline, patience, and the courage to act when it matters most. His life is a testament to the idea that greatness is not measured by size or strength, but by character and conviction. But Conner's legacy goes beyond the military. It speaks to anyone who has ever faced a challenge, doubted their own abilities, or wondered if one person can make a difference. It reminds us that the skills we learn in childhood, the lessons we take from family and community, can shape us in ways we never expect. It shows that the quietest voices can have the greatest impact, and that the most important battles are often fought far from the spotlight. As you finish this documentary, think about what Garlin Conner's story means for you. Is it a lesson in the power of resilience? A reminder that courage is not the absence of fear, but the determination to do what needs to be done? Or simply a story of how one person, armed with patience, skill, and a sense of duty, can change the course of history? Whatever it is, let it inspire you to face your own challenges with the same spirit of determination and hope. If you've enjoyed this journey through the life of Garlin Conner, please like, comment, and subscribe for more untold World War II stories and deep dives into the people and moments that shaped history. What do you think is the most important lesson from Conner's story? Share your thoughts below. We love hearing your take. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. Until next time, keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep remembering the real stories behind the legends.